importance, but this one comes during a pandemic in which tens of thousands of our neighbors died, and the rhythms and patterns of the way that we work and worship and go to school and engage with our communities may be changed forever. It comes as the city is grappling with how to rebuild an economy with an uncertain future. It comes as New Yorkers remain locked in an emotionally charged debate over crime, gun violence, and whether or not to fundamentally reform the way the NYPD polices our city. It also comes in a year in which New Yorkers are using a new ranked choice voting system for the first time. We're going to tackle some of these issues tonight, and to do that, I'll be joined by my co-moderators. They are Brian Lehrer of WNYC Radio and Josefa Velasquez of The City. Now, due to the pandemic, the candidates will be joining us remotely tonight. They are Maya Wiley, Andrew Yang, Ray McGuire, Shaun Donovan, Dianne Morales, Kathryn Garcia, Eric Adams, and Scott Stringer. I should note that this is the largest field ever for a campaign finance board sponsored debate. The rules that you see on your screen have been agreed to by all the candidates. Generally, each candidate will get a chance to deliver an opening statement of 45 seconds, and answers to most questions will be limited to 60 seconds. Candidates may be given a chance for short rebuttals, and all candidates will get to ask one opponent one question. We're going to begin with opening statements. The order for tonight's opening statements was determined by a random drawing this morning. We'll begin with Dianne Morales. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Dianne Morales, and I'm ready to be your mayor. I was born and raised in Bed-Stuy. I'm an educator and the single mom of 2 children who went to our city's public schools. I've had decades of experience managing multi-million-dollar organizations, and I've led teams of hundreds of people to provide life-saving services to New Yorkers in crisis. My platform centers 3 pillars: dignity, care, and solidarity. Together, we can redefine safety, invest in housing for all, and finally treat all essential workers as essential. We can rebuild our small businesses, advance a Green New Deal, and make CUNY free. We've been marching for a future that sees us. It's time to choose the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Andrew Yang.
Hello, New York City. It's great to be with you tonight. I'm running for mayor for the simplest of reasons. We need new leadership and new ideas to address the challenges that are growing more serious around us every day. When I talk to New Yorkers on the street, you tell me that you are most concerned about 3 things: public safety, jobs, and fighting poverty. We can deliver on these 3 things. We can reduce homelessness by 50% or more, get our schools open, and get our people back to work. We need a leader who is laser focused on getting results, on solutions, on what will make our city work better for us, and not politics, ideology, or who did me a favor 10 years ago. I want to be that mayor, a mayor that can even make us hopeful and optimistic about our city again. And I would love your support.
Thank you. Next candidate is Scott Stringer. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, born and raised in Washington Heights. I've seen this city have some real issues over the years, but I've also seen our city bounce back. But nothing this past year we could have ever imagined. We're still 600,000 jobs down, and we lost 32,000 friends, neighbors, and relatives. I lost my own mom, Arlene, to COVID. But New York City, we're tough and we're resilient, and we're ready to come off the mat and fight for our greatest comeback. I believe the next mayor has to have an understanding of our city, has to have a bold vision for reimagining the next generation of New York. And I do believe that we cannot afford a mayor on training wheels. I'll be ready on day 1 to use my experience and ideas to give our city the hope and opportunity to transform the next generation. I ask for your support.
Thank you. Our next candidate, Kathryn Garcia.
Thank you. I'm Kathryn Garcia. I'm running for mayor because I love this city and have a vision for creating a more livable city, a city that's affordable, where you can raise your family on a paycheck, a safe city, regardless of the color of your skin. I have been this city's crisis manager for the last 14 years. I have managed billions of dollars of budgets, as well as tens of thousands of staff. I have pumped water during Hurricane Sandy, and during COVID, delivered 1 million meals a day to hungry and sick New Yorkers. And I am proud to have gotten the endorsement of the New York Times because this is the most consequential election of our generation. And I am ready to execute on the vision on day one. I don't need to be told where the lights are in City Hall. And I want to make this a better New York for all of us.
All right, thank you. Our next candidate is Eric Adams. Good evening.
Good evening. This is a challenging moment for New York, especially working people. But we've been here before. In fact, some of us never left. Growing up in Queens, I was a victim of police brutality, but instead of saying, woe is me, I said, why not me? I became a police officer and fought for reform inside. Then I became a legislator and the borough president. Every step of the way, I sought to make change based on the blue collar values of my working class single mother. I'm running for mayor for the city of New York to reduce crime, grow our economy, address racial inequality, affordability, and prosperous city for all. And I will unite our city by turning our pain into purpose. This moment must turn into a movement. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Maya Wiley.
Good evening. I am Maya Wiley, and I'm a civil rights lawyer and a mom. And we love this city. The reality is, though, it shouldn't be so hard to live here. And while we recover, and we will because we always do, it's time we recover, all of us, because that's what we have not done in the past. And look, with a different kind of leadership, we can have a city where we can all afford the rent, a city where we can be safe in our streets and on our subways, and Black and brown New Yorkers can be safe from police violence. And I'm not going to stand by as a mother for losing an entire generation of our children to trauma and to violence. And this is a time when we can have a change-making leadership, because this city must fix what's broken, and that's why I'm running to be the first mom as mayor.
Okay, thank you. Our next candidate, Ray McGuire.
Listen, I love New York City. It's given me everything personally. It's given me everything professionally. But everywhere I go, New Yorkers tell me they want change. The status quo is failing them. New Yorkers want a mayor for the comeback who will pursue economic recovery relentlessly. New Yorkers want a mayor who will restore safety in our streets and subways and finally get our kids educated. Because I grew up with very little, raised by my single mother and grandparents, along with half a dozen foster children. I know what it means to struggle. I will bring every New Yorker along in this comeback. I broke down barriers in business. I know how to turn the city's economy around. As a political outsider, I will make decisions solely on the merits. I do not owe any political favors. Zero. Bupkis. New York needs a mayor who's a doer, not a talker. Your ballot's going to look different this year. I'm the fourth name down, Ray McGuire, and I'm asking for your first place vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to Shaun Donovan.
This is the moment to rebuild. From a health pandemic, an economic pandemic, a pandemic of inequality. This fight isn't new to me. I've spent my entire career improving the lives of New Yorkers. I started rebuilding neighborhoods from the South Bronx to Central Brooklyn 30 years ago. In the depths of the Great Recession, President Obama asked me to keep people in their homes and rebuild our economy. When Sandy hit our shores, he asked me to lead the recovery. And when Ebola and Zika struck, I worked side by side with Dr. Fauci in the Situation Room to prevent a pandemic that could have cost 30,000 of our neighbors their lives. This moment demands a leader with bold ideas and the track record to make those ideas real in the lives of every New Yorker. That's why I'm asking for your vote for mayor.
All right, thank you, candidates. I'm going to start with the first question, and it's about public safety. Over the last year, we've seen a push and pull over the police department with calls to reform or even defund the department, mixed with calls from New Yorkers who are worried about a rise in crime. As of the start of this month, homicides in New York City are up 17% so far this year compared with last year, with shootings up by over 83%. And just last night, of course, a police officer in Brooklyn was shot 3 times by an alleged gang member. What are your concrete plans to address the situation in your first year in office? Let's start with you, Mr. Stringer.
I grew up back in the 1970s when there were 2,000 murders a year. The A train I took as a kid was a roving crime scene. I understand that we can never go back to those days, and I'm not going to bring my kids or anyone's children to a place where this violence continues. So as mayor, I'm going to make sure that we get police to do the real police work that needs to be done. We've got to solve violent crime. We've got to actually up the clearance rates so we can get the people off the streets that are running the guns. And I'm very committed to doing that as mayor. But I also want to say that we cannot in this moment simply go back to the Giuliani style of policing that impacted Black and brown children, that scarred them. And we have to seek a better way. I want to use resources so that we can invest in violence interrupter programs, keep our children away from the criminal justice system. You see, we need a two-tier approach. We need to get rid of the violence, but we also have to make sure we protect our children. And as mayor, I will use my experience as a legislator, as a borough president, and as the chief fiscal officer to create that important balance for the future of our city, for my children, for your children, and the children we're never going to meet or know, but they're the ones who are hanging in the balance.
As a quick follow-up, Mr. Stringer, violence interrupters have been a part of the de Blasio administration's strategy, and they've talked about substantially increasing the amount of funding going into those programs. Are they on the right track?
Look, I think the violence interrupter programs are very critical, but we have to scale it up. It can't just be in 17 precincts. It should be in 77 precincts. But also, 40% of 911 calls come in not for crime, for mental health issues, for wellness issues, for quality of life issues. And I think it's time now to have mental health issues be dealt with by mental health professionals and not over policing. The role of police is to stop the violence. The role of violence interrupters, the role of social workers and guidance counselors is to keep kids away from the criminal justice system. Every time we lose a child to prison, we all fail as a city. And I believe I have the experience, the management skills to be able to create that balance, to bring leadership to the NYPD, but also build a network that will make us realize that this is a lot more complicated than simply playing to the crowd and not solving the problem.
Mr. McGuire, same question to you. Mayhem in Times Square over the weekend, an officer shot last night. If you're sworn in on January 1st, what would you do to deal with those issues?
So first of all, we have a covenant. The leadership of this city has a covenant with New Yorkers, a contract with New Yorkers for safety. That is part of the premier experience that we have in New York City. By the same token, it's very personal to me. I'm a 6'4", 200-pound Black man. I want to have the police protect me and not profile me. So what I would do is restructure the NYPD. My plan in specific, which is what you've asked for, is I have a deputy mayor for public safety, day-to-day job as a manager in NYPD, and interact with the folks in the neighborhoods, number one. Number two, I'd have a chain of command held accountable. One or more officers commits an infraction, the entire chain of command gets held accountable. And then let's recognize the following. 4 to 5 of the 10 calls that go into 911 have to do with mental health issues. I'm going to have an emergency social services bureau core 24 hours, 7 days a week that works with the NYPD. It sits also in the subway. So my first plan is to make certain I restore a culture of respect, accountability, and proportionality, make certain we invest and prevent the rise in crime, which means I'm going to invest into the communities, want to have community policing, want to make certain we have summer jobs, make certain we have community centers. There, we began to address the fundamental problems of what's taking place with crime. My view is to get crime off the street, get the criminals off the street, and make certain that we prevent it from the outset, which is my overall plan.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Garcia, how would you deal with the issues of public safety that have come to the fore in recent days?
Yes, no, it has been really shocking. Last night, shooting of a police officer. Thank goodness he's going to be okay. But this is also personal to me. I come from a multiracial family. My brother is Black. My children are half Puerto Rican. We need to make sure we are safe, but that also there is respect on our streets every single day, which is why I have a plan that includes making sure that we have the gun suppression division, which targets gun traffickers and gun violence and has been disrupting that violence over the last year. We need to do gun buybacks. I've said I would increase that. We need to work with our state and local partners, the ATF, the FBI, to stop the flow of guns into the city. Because last time I checked, we did not have a gun manufacturer in the city of New York. But we also need to instill a new culture where PD are guardians rather than warriors against their communities, where we have real neighborhood policing, and we are actually measuring the interactions with community rather than the number of arrests, because you get what you measure, and that we promote off those measurements. But we do need clear and transparent discipline to instill trust in the NYPD.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donovan.
Errol, every police officer in this city needs to have two clear missions: to reduce violent crime and gun violence, and to treat every New Yorker with respect, especially in our Black and brown communities. I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually worked with leaders across the country to do exactly that, to create both safety and respect. So I know that we need to do three things. First, we need to reform policing with real training, transparency, accountability. And we need to reduce what we're asking the police to do. They shouldn't be mental health experts with our homeless, police the hallways of our schools, or get into altercations around traffic tickets. They should be focused every day on guns and violent crime. And I would do that as mayor. But we also need to make sure that our police reflect our communities. You know, fewer than half of our police actually live in New York City, and I would change that as mayor. And finally, we need to reinvest in our communities to break the cycle of hopelessness and violence. I've done that my entire career, and I know that we can get to, by the end of my first term, reinvesting $3 billion into our communities from our criminal justice system to break the cycle of hopelessness and crime.
With the idea,
I'm the only candidate in the race that's done that around this city and country,
Donovan,
and I could do that here.
Would the $3 billion be coming out of the existing NYPD budget? Is that the idea?
I would do it out of our criminal justice budget more broadly, Errol. You know, we spend over $400,000 per person per year at Rikers, and we get bad results. And so we have a huge opportunity. We should stop those who aren't a danger to the society from going to Rikers in the first place.
Okay.
We should ensure when they come out that they actually have a place to get hope and jobs and back into their communities. I did that as housing commissioner in this city, giving housing to folks coming out of Rikers. It was so successful. It's been replicated in 40 cities across this country.
Okay, got it. Mr. Yang. Do we need to unmute?
Thank you.
Okay.
The first thing I do as mayor is go to our police force and say that your city needs you. Your city needs you to do your jobs professionally, responsibly, and justly. But the police are going to be a core way for us to address the public safety concerns that so many New Yorkers have. And let me be clear, defund the police is the wrong approach for New York City. We need to evolve to a 21st century form of policing, a new anti-violence and community safety unit that would work with community leaders, of plainclothes cops that go into communities and concentrate on getting the guns out and on what's called focused deterrence. Because the fact is, a lot of communities know who the troublemakers are. And if you can bring them in and say, look, if something happens in your neighborhood, you're going to be one of the first people we call, then you can start to get the rates down. We need intelligence-led policing, where we're attacking the iron pipeline, the source of guns that are in Florida and other parts of the country, and then flowing into New York City. These are some of the practices that would help make our people safer, but you have to start by saying to the police very clearly that you are vital to our city's recovery, because there is no recovery without public safety.
Okay, thank you. And I know, Mr. Adams, you want to get in on this conversation as well.
Yes, Errol, there's no one on this Zoom that has a greater depth of knowledge around public safety than I do. Because of that knowledge, I know gun buyback programs are not good programs, because those are not the guns we are looking for. It's good to do cosmetically. I also know that having civilians carrying out car stops is extremely dangerous. That is one of the most dangerous jobs a police officer could do, to do a car stop. I also know that the prerequisite to prosperity is public safety. And I have been stating this for a while, and I'm happy after the Times Square shooting that the other candidates, for the most part, have joined me in dealing with this violence. We must fight violence with prevention and intervention. Prevention, those are the long-term programs that you're hearing about, and they're great, but we have to deal with intervention. We have gun violence now. And if we don't reinstitute a plainclothes unit, not an anti-crime version, but well-trained police officers to go after gang behavior, those gangs are driving the crime in the city, and stop the flow of guns to the city, we're going to lose more young people. 95% of those who are victims to gun violence are Black and brown. 95% of the shooters are Black and brown. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. We must deal with police misconduct, but we have to deal with this real pervasive handgun problem we have in this city.
Let me follow up with something. You have called for the recreation of what you just described, a specialized unit to intercept guns, but as you remember, the street crimes unit had that task in the 1990s. It was disbanded after the killing of Amadou Diallo. And more recently, last summer, Commissioner Shea disbanded the anti-crime unit because he said it wasn't adding much to public safety. You left the department over a decade ago. Are you suggesting that we go back to those old strategies?
Well, remember, when Diallo was shot, remember, I was heading 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I was on Wheeler Avenue. No one on this stage can say that but me. I know Amadou Diallo's mother, and I know the Adna Louimas who endorsed me. Here's what I am saying. The reason we're having a problem with the street crime unit back then and the anti-crime unit now is because we had the wrong officers assigned, and many of them were turning off their cameras while carrying out their actions. So let's have proper supervision. Let's make sure you have the right officers assigned that understand communication, conflict resolution, and use our skill and intel to identify those known shooters with precision policing and identify those gang members that are creating the havoc in our cities.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Morales, how would you approach the problems that we've seen in recent days with the shootings and the street violence?
So let me just start off by saying that I share every New Yorker's desire to live in safety. But the reality of it is that safety is not synonymous with policing. We've got the largest municipal police department in the nation. If the size and the funding associated with policing equated safety, we'd be the safest city in the country. But the reality of it is that our communities are over-policed and under-resourced. So the violence that we're addressing or that we're witnessing is actually happening on the watch of the NYPD. We actually need to recognize that police respond to crime. They don't prevent crime. We need to invest in our communities, not in people. We need to address the conditions that make people unsafe. Poverty, community divestment, unequal education, health injustice, housing insecurity. Those are the things that we need to be providing for and taking care of so that we can ultimately build safer communities in this city. It's time for us to focus on it and address the systems, not the symptoms. That is one of the things that we need to fundamentally transform in terms of our approach to these issues.
Okay, and Ms. Wiley, what would be your approach?
Well, look, let me just start by saying I have been Black all my life. And that means I know two things. I know what it is like to fear crime, and I know what it's like to fear police violence. And we have to stop having this conversation, making it a false choice, telling folks that you have to choose one or the other. And I was in Bed-Stuy today. I went because, Errol, there's one fact you left out. And I'm just going to call it, as someone who's done civil rights work my whole life, there is a mother tonight who has lost a child in that shooting. It was tragic that that police officer got shot. I'm so grateful he's okay, but there is a child who is dead. And the reality is that we have to change the balance. I'm going to take $1 billion from the New York City Police Department to shift that money to create trauma-informed care in our schools, because when we do that, violence goes down down and graduation rates go up. I'm going to have a civilian police commissioner because we are going to make it a truly accountable police force to the public. But in addition to that civilian police commissioner, a civilian oversight commission that sets the rules and the priorities of policing, but also elevating the power of community. Because when I was in that community today, what community leaders were saying is, we don't get the resources to solve the problems we know will fix our communities, and that will change when I am mayor.
Okay, candidates, we have only about a minute or so left in this section, but let me ask for a couple of shows of hands. Should just building on what Ms. Wiley talked about, should the next commissioner come from outside the NYPD? Please raise your hand if you think that's what you want to do, a commissioner who is not from within the department and has never served as a cop. Okay.
You asked two questions.
That was two.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Two questions.
I mean, that's what I meant when I say from, not from within the department. Outside commissioner, the way Ms. Wiley described? Yes. Okay. I wanted to also ask by a show of hands, will you commit to making sure that body camera footage of police-involved shootings is automatically released to the public? Unlike many jurisdictions, New York doesn't do that. Okay, for our radio audience, that's all of the candidates agreeing to do that, to making sure police-involved shooting footage is automatically released to the public. And then I guess finally, the MTA has repeatedly asked for increased NYPD presence and patrols in the subways. The current mayor has said that it's part of a political fight and it's not clear what he's going to do. But how many of you would respond to a request like that by sending more cops into the subway system? Hold up your hands for just a minute.
We need mental health professionals.
The ones who are not raising their hands are Scott Stringer, Maya Wiley, and Dianne Morales.
Now, Errol,
Yes.
Errol, we should have the opportunity to say what we would do, because the reality is a big part of our safety problem in the subways is a mental health and homelessness problem, where we have the tools and resources to ensure that we have the proper outreach workers helping get folks who are mentally ill or substance addictive out of the subways and into housing that has supportive services connected to it.
But let me ask you,
You can do both.
Let me just ask you, we're completely out of time in this section, but let me just ask you, briefly, Ms. Wiley, every day, an estimated 500 calls come into the 911 system for people who are in emotional or mental distress. That's a lot of calls. That's today, tomorrow, Sunday, every day. Do we have the resources to deal with that, in your opinion?
We have to create the crisis management response, but we have a tremendous number of community-based and peer counselors who are able to do this with the proper support, and we can do it much more quickly as a city.
Errol, I just want to say, I just want to say one thing.
Hold on, candidates. I have to do a little. Bear with me. I have to do a little time management here. I'm going to let 4 of you speak, but you have to be very, 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 very succinct.
Yes.
So, Stringer, Garcia, Morales, and McGuire, please. Mr. Stringer, go.
Very quickly. This is not new. We've been cycling mental health issues in and out of the underground subways for decades. And the truth is, every time there's a call for more police, we end up not solving the problem. This is got to be the new way of looking at it. And that means investing in mental health professionals to make sure that people get supportive housing, get their medicine, get the services they need. What's going to happen? They end up going to Rikers Island, which is the largest mental health facility in the city. This cycle has got to be broken.
Got it. Ms. Garcia.
Okay, I'll try and be super brief, but we do need to respond when the MTA says we need more cops in the subway. That does not mean we're not sending mental health professionals into the subway as well, so that we can get people the services they need and into supportive housing to deal with their mental health issues as well as with their substance abuse issues. We can do both.
Got it. Ms. Morales.
Yes, I mean, I'm really glad to hear that so many of my colleagues in this race have come over to the other side. I've called for the creation of a community first responders department that would be staffed by people who are trained and skilled at intervention and de-escalation in these situations, mental health, homelessness, and substance abuse, and would also serve as part of a larger ecosystem of human service providers, of mental health providers, of housing providers, and of intervention specialists who could actually break the cycle. The idea is to actually meet people where they're at and give them the services and the supports that they need so that they can move out of their current situation.
Got it. Mr. McGuire, briefly.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. This is included in my safety and justice plan and at rayformayor.com, where I do call for, as I responded to your earlier question, an emergency social services core that sits within the NYPD precincts as well as within the subway. You need to have both. It is not and or, it is both.
Got it.
Errol, I just want to say, I was raising my hand as well.
Both the police.
Thanks. I saw your hand, Mr. Donovan. The time will pile up.
I just want to say I'm the only candidate in this race who's actually done this around the country. We dramatically reduced homelessness when I led the strategy. We did it through setting up these systems.
Totally understood. We will have an entire section on homelessness if we can get to it. Right now, though, we're going to turn to Josefa and Brian to discuss COVID recovery and the economy. We'll start with Josefa.
All right, thanks, Errol. So on the topic of COVID recovery and the economy, the next mayor is going to inherit a city that's still reeling from the pandemic. We have hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their jobs. Many service and tourism jobs have yet to recover, and a lot of the office workers who have flocked to Midtown and downtown, present company included, are still working from home. Yet prior to the pandemic, many families were still struggling to make ends meet. So let's start with you, Mr. Adams. What's the most important policy you have to restart the economy, and how do you rebuild that economy with equity?
Well, and that's important. That's the problem we have had in this city for far too long, that the inequalities, and when we rebuild this economy, we must rebuild it with that lens. Keep in mind this, pre-COVID, we had 300,000 jobs that we could not fill. So we don't have an employment problem. We have a real skills problem. I'm going to fill that gap by having a universal application process to allow men and women throughout the city to fill out that application, partner with my business community to determine what jobs are needed, work with my workforce development using technology to identify how to bring up the skill levels that we desire. And then we have to grow the economy. We need to attract new businesses here. We should become the center of biotech, the center of life sciences, the center of technology. Lift up what Facebook is doing at Hudson Yard and what Google is doing in Chelsea. And then we need to lean into our small businesses. New York is too expensive, too bureaucratic, and too difficult to do business in because we have a siloed city.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yang. And Ms. Garcia, same question to you. How do you rebuild the economy? And how do you do it that in a way that makes it fair for our lower and middle income New Yorkers?
The economy has just taken such a huge hit. We have still over 600,000 people who are unemployed, and our small business community has been particularly devastated. My sister owns a restaurant event space in Brooklyn. This has been a really bad year, but we will regrow this economy, and it's by focusing on our small businesses with a one city permit, so you don't have to go to 8 agencies before you sell a bowl of soup. But we also need to focus on the fact that women have taken a huge hit, and 1 in 4 women are thinking of stepping back, which is why we need free childcare for those who are making under $70,000 a year. But we can't regrow this economy and bring back arts and culture if we don't get the fundamental city services right, that people feel safe in their communities, that kids are getting back to school, and that we're keeping the streets clean. And I have managed complex problems for all of my career, whether or not that was in housing, sanitation, or food.
Okay. Ms. Garcia, just to follow up on that, New York City's budget has taken a hit because of the pandemic. How would you propose to pay for some of the programs that you're planning on?
Thank you for that question. We are very lucky that we will have federal money for the foreseeable future, but we need to manage it to make sure that we are in balance when it is done. That means regrowing the economy, because that brings back revenue to the city of New York. But that also means finding efficiencies. When I was at DEP, I cut $100 million from the budget without a layoff. That means making sure that we are looking at new revenue sources, whether or not that's marine dockage fees or an increase in the pied-à-terre tax or doing something really interesting with marijuana taxes. There are real opportunities to be able to pay for these programs.
All right, thank you for that. Same question for you, Ms. Wiley. How would you respond if elected mayor?
You know, I spent COVID at home with my family the entire time, but we very quickly, I having known what small businesses go through, my mother was a small business owner, but we knew that there were not going to be federal dollars flowing to our community mom and pop shops. The programs are often not designed for them. So we organized a volunteer network to help them out. And guess what it proved? That we were right. So I'm actually looking at this city and all its resources to say, I've got a plan. It's called New Deal New York, because I'm going to increase our capital construction budget to create 100,000 new jobs. But we're also going to do it differently. In addition to having a New Deal czar, that's the person who's going to be a direct report to me, that's going to cut through the red tape of government to get projects moving faster. But those projects are going to have local targeted hiring. So communities hard hit with unemployment before COVID and worse after are going to have more job opportunities. But we're going to build things we need built, like more affordable housing that's deeply affordable, fixing things we need fixed. I got $2 billion also to help bring back public housing. But these are the kinds of things that bring our city back, but fixes what was broken beforehand.
Thank you, Ms. Wiley. Mr. McGuire, I wanted to pose this question to you. You have an ambitious plan of creating 50,000 jobs by subsidizing half of the salary of workers. As I asked Ms. Garcia, New York City's budget really took a financial hit from the pandemic. We got some federal funding. So how much would this program cost to implement if you're elected mayor, and how would the city ultimately pay for it?
Are you asking me or Ms. Garcia? Me?
Yes,
Ray McGuire?
Mr.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr.
Listen,
McGuire.
this is, you know, the answer is no jobs, no city, no jobs, no dignity. You've outlined the crisis that the COVID has had on the economy. I'm the only one who's actually managed through a crisis with accountability. I had to manage through the depths of the financial crisis. I had to attract, hire, and retain the best talent, and often we had to do more with less, and then sometimes we had to do everything with nothing. I do have a plan. It is called the greatest, most inclusive economic comeback plan in the history of New York City. 500,000 jobs. Go big, go small, go forward. Go big is infrastructure, affordable housing, broadband for the 1.5 million New Yorkers who don't have it, sewage mains, bridges, and yes, making certain that the climate, the 100-year flood that comes every 5 years, that we take care of that. But essential to New York City are the small businesses, which is where 50% of the workers work. My plan, 50,000 jobs, jobs accelerator, taking care of half the wages for 1 year, negotiating their retention of New York City's sales tax receipt, appointing a deputy mayor for small businesses. And the way that I pay for it, and it is a model that I've gone through, that I've vetted with the experts to make sure that I can do this. It'll cost me $1.8 billion over 2 years. And I have the resources within the budget and operate more efficiently to do that. We can grow our way out of this. We also need to make certain that going forward, we invest in those businesses that have been excluded, minority and women-owned businesses, as well as the businesses of the future technology. So I have a plan, and I have a track record of having executed that plan. So thank you.
Thank you. So on that topic of small businesses, I want to ask Mr. Yang, many restaurant delivery workers, a lot of low-wage workers, many of whom are immigrants, have faced massive dislocation because of the pandemic over the last years. If elected mayor, what's your plan to help them?
Josefa, there are 3 components to the jobs recovery, and small businesses is the first. I feel this deeply as a former small business owner and operator here in New York. So the first thing we have to do as a city is to be a genuine partner to the restaurants and small businesses that are trying to recover. I've declared a moratorium on all fines for those businesses because they're just trying to get on their feet. The last thing they need is an inspector coming and dinging them and hitting them with a fine. So that's a start, but I've also proposed a new People's Bank that will invest directly in helping these small businesses recover, particularly in minority neighborhoods that have been hardest hit during this time. We have to think bigger, though, about our recovery. We have to open our schools so that people can go back to work. we're missing 85% of commuters, and that means a lot of jobs. But the biggest way we can get our jobs back is that tourism generated $47 billion in revenue in 2019 and supported over 300,000 of the 600,000 jobs we're missing. It's one reason why these public safety concerns are so disastrous, because people are less likely to visit a city that doesn't seem safe. We should be investing significant sums, and I mean like far more than the 30 million that Bill de Blasio has proposed, to make our streets safer and more appealing, but then also to promote our city and get that energy back, because that's the best way we're going to help that restaurant stay open, is by getting customers back so that that person can have a job to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Ms. Morales, same question for you. How do you help many of these lower wage workers who were dislocated or who faced mass dislocation in the last year?
Sure. So, you know, the reality of it is that COVID-19 has had a real impact on our economy. And also, it's not had an equal impact on everyone. We have, in fact, generated more millionaires and billionaires throughout the course of this last year, while we made our vulnerable, essential workers much more marginalized and pushed them further to the edge. So what I have proposed is actually the creation of a new economy for the people, one that dramatically shifts where we're investing our dollars. Instead of providing subsidies and grants to large corporations, I have called for actually ending the corporate welfare system and investing those dollars in our small and mid-sized businesses so that we can grow our economy from the ground up and from the center out. I've also called for the creation of a massive public jobs program. We need jobs and justice. We can do that through the creation of green jobs. We can do that through the creation of a public works infrastructure. We can do that through the expansion of our care economy, because we know over the, yes.
I'd like to ask a follow-up on that. The things you're talking about are very ideological, things that could take years to do. Some of these people need help now. They've been out of work for a year. They haven't had resources coming in. So what could you do that could provide some assistance to these people?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that we should actually be providing financial assistance to people right now. That is something that we should be doing so that we can make sure that we begin to help our folks stabilize. But the other thing is, we can't afford to wait in terms of creating jobs and rebuilding the city in a new and different way. The idea of this austerity economy is one that actually is going to take us back to the old ways. It's time for us to actually invest in our communities. We need to not just generate jobs, but actually do the work that we need to do to build back our city in a new and different way that actually takes care of everyone, because the old ways weren't working. So I am committed to building a new New York City, and to doing that in partnership with our most vulnerable and our most impacted, so that we are centering and prioritizing their needs first.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. At this rate, we're going to be ending by 10 o'clock at night. So, Mr. Donovan, same question goes for you. A lot of people have been out of work. Some people didn't qualify for federal assistance because of their documentation status. So how would you help them out during the first few months as mayor?
This has been a terrible, terrible year for so many New Yorkers. We've lost more than 30,000 of our neighbors, and we still have more than 500,000 who are out of work. So we do need a mayor who can, on day one, make sure that we're helping this city recover. No one in this campaign has had the experience I have rebuilding after 9/11 from the Great Recession. And with all due respect, Ray, no one has that experience of really making sure we come back, specifically from a crisis that you helped create in the Great Recession. I got billions of dollars to families quickly by partnering with nonprofits. I could work with President Biden and all our leadership in the administration to speed what is trillions of dollars of aid that's available right now. This is a New Deal moment. We also need to recognize that we have a mayor who's been, since we can regulate our way to recover.
Thank you, Mr. Donovan.
I would just say that
McGuire,
our small businesses need help now, and I would do that as mayor. We're finding them. We need to set up a system that actually helps them recover.
that we need to go through, and we would hate to use the mute function on anyone. Mr. McGuire, you had your hand raised. Just very quickly, how do you respond to what Mr. Donovan has said?
I say every time we get together on one of these Zooms, Shaun showed that he continued to be completely uninformed by the facts. He continued to get confused by the facts, and he knows I had zero to do with anything that happened to the mortgage crisis. What he also knows is that I was completely involved in helping to rebuild. I was there fundamentally. So he says he's the only one. I have accountability. I was held accountable, and I stayed in that position longer than anybody else in the history of the business for 13 years. I didn't say anybody black. I said anybody in the history of the business for 13 years. And you know what they call that in my neighborhood? They call that receipts. He's got blank checks.
So I just want to say it's very interesting to hear men always claim that they have all the experience. And I just want to say one thing. $5,000 care grants directly into the pockets of the 100,000 neediest families. That's my plan. MyWileyForMayor.com. And it will include undocumented
We have one more candidate we need to get to. So, Mr. Stringer, you've had your hand raised patiently. We want to hear from you.
Actually, I raised my hand first and keep getting passed over for that. I did have something that I wanted to
your hand raised in that case.
Okay.
And
Eric, we need your
Mr. Stringer has not gone yet. So, Mr. Stringer, go ahead.
Look, I was the only person on this stage that took on Bill de Blasio's false choice during the pandemic. He said in order to balance the budget, we needed to cut summer jobs for kids and lay off 34,000 workers. I said that's a false choice. As controller, I told him he had to do agency efficiencies, get rid of the outside contracts, the bureaucracy, streamline so we wouldn't have to cut vital services. After months and months of fighting, he finally did the hard work and we were able to overcome. In addition, I used my financial management skills, city controller, to identify $2.2 billion in savings when we refinanced with OMB. This isn't shoulda, woulda, coulda. This was actually real work in the midst of the pandemic. And my revitalization plan is very specific. $1 billion in stimulus money will go to small businesses. I'll make sure that we adapt to the green economy where we can create 100,000 jobs. I'll also make sure that we'll partner with CUNY for a real workforce development program because we're going to have to retrain a generation of New Yorkers with retrofitting and all the jobs that are coming our way. That's going to be bigger than the Industrial Revolution. We don't even need two-year degrees. Micro-credentialing will get people into the workforce.
All right.
My work
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. We obviously want to keep on this topic. It's something that we all have a lot of thoughts about, but I want to kick it over to Brian Lair, who's going to continue this conversation. Brian.
Thanks, Josepha, and hello, candidates and viewers and listeners. As you all know, I think, about small businesses, the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce estimates that in that one borough alone, 20% of the small businesses have closed for good since the start of the pandemic. Based on one stat I saw, that would be more than 10,000 businesses gone just in Brooklyn. And on my show, we've had several call-ins for listeners just to do obituaries for small businesses in the neighborhoods that they live in, that they have loved and are now gone. And the lines were full every time. Here's my question, and I want to go around for short answers on this. Small businesses in the city are always complaining about the regulatory burden that the city imposes. Some of you have referenced that already. But I want you each to get specific and name briefly one specific regulation that you would undo or ease and why the public would still be protected. And Mr. Adams, I know you had your hand up for the last round. It didn't get in, so we can start with you. Just be very specific and name a regulation you would change.
Thank you so much. And first of all, the recovery is going to be specifically due to public safety and inequalities. But the specific, we could take down the rules around signage in front of buildings and businesses. It is a ridiculous rule that should be removed, and we can give a 30-day plan for non-dangerous infractions, 2 weeks for those infractions that should be changed in 24 to 48 hours.
Thank you very much. Signage. Ms. Wiley?
I actually had the same one because I was meeting with the two sisters who started a laundromat. They got charged $150 because the sign that they had in front of the laundromat was more than 3 feet from the entrance. And when they asked to say, just let us move the sign, don't charge us the $150, they still got the fee. I've got a plan to give $30 million in grants to small businesses to clear back debt, but also a fee and fine holiday for at least a year and untangle the red tape that's strangling our small businesses.
Ms. Garcia, signage or something else?
I'm not going to go with signage. I agree with signage, but I actually think a more fundamental challenge, particularly for restaurants, is the surprise inspections of the health inspector. We do need to make sure we are inspecting restaurants, but they can schedule the appointment so they are staffed to be able to manage it moving forward rather than losing a whole night's worth of receipts.
They wouldn't hide stuff and clean up for the inspector with the appointments?
They would not be hiding stuff and from the appointments. And you're talking about how many people have ever gotten sick in a restaurant in New York City. It's really doesn't happen. But we know this is the hardest thing on restaurants and the thing that makes it really difficult for them to stay open because you lose a whole night of work.
Ms. Morales, you got one?
I do, actually. I learned recently that our Arab American business owners are not included under the MWBE in New York City. And so under my newly expanded support for small businesses, and in particular my focus on MWBEs with a focus on the M, I would actually bring the Arab American community under the umbrella and allow them to access that kind of support.
And that's minority and women-owned businesses for people who don't know the acronym.
Yes.
Mr. Stringer.
I would focus at the Department of Buildings. It's a conflict of interest. On the one hand, the Buildings Department is supposed to expedite permits and at the same time also do inspections. And I believe that we should ban the use of an expediter. It's the only agency that I can think of that actually requires you to hire a middleman to talk to your city government. I would overhaul the Department of Buildings first and foremost.
Mr. Yang.
I would cap delivery fees and make sure that every restaurant actually has access to its customers' data because they're your customers and it'll give you a much better chance to survive. The main issue facing small business owners right now is back rent. What we need to do is get in there and help them negotiate settlements so they have a light at the end of the tunnel and can actually afford to reopen.
Mr. McGuire.
You know, today we are doing everything we can to disincentivize restaurants and small businesses. The restaurants, many with whom I've spoken, have gotten 45 fines from 7 different agencies. We do not apply the regulations equitably. I was just at Westchester Square in the Bronx, Shanghai Red restaurant. We're 10 blocks away. You'd have somebody who's done the entire same outdoor dining. Shanghai is shut down. 10 blocks away, there's another restaurant that's got the same kind of outdoor dining. It's up and running. So I would look at both the Department of Health and the Department of Buildings and make sure that the laws are applied equitably. And in so doing, I would appoint a deputy mayor for small businesses, a red tape commission, and a shot clock, cut through the bureaucracy, make sure that we hold ourselves accountable in the agencies and make sure that we did whatever we could to invite small businesses, including and especially those restaurants, make it easier for them to do business and cut through the expediters.
So that's the big picture. Do you have one particular regulation or piece of over-regulation?
I would say the regulation having to do with building outdoor restaurants and how quickly that gets executed and the fines that apply immediately after the restaurants have been, the outdoor dining has been set up. And many of these restaurants come in, they get $35,000 fines or $25,000 fines. So I would make sure that the regulations are applied.
And Mr. Donovan.
Thanks, Brian. You know, when the pandemic was just starting, I was hearing from so many restaurants across this city that were having to shut down, but at the same time, a desperate need for emergency meals. So I raised over $1 million, started a program called Common Table that got restaurants cooking hot, fresh emergency meals. We developed an app that delivered those meals directly to people's doors. And just last week, I was up in the South Bronx visiting some of those restaurants. And what I heard was that despite the changing health guidance, including the CDC's today, allowing those who have been vaccinated to be indoors without masks in some cases. We need to fundamentally change our approach for restaurants to ensure that folks can sit at the bar and do other things that they couldn't do. And that would be a fundamental change that would allow our restaurants to get back on their feet and get more customers in.
Couple of follow-ups for a few of you in the remaining time in this round. Mr. Yang and I believe Ms. Wiley, you both said that you would suspend fines, all fines, for a period of time. If you do that, how do you enforce that regulations that protect the public are actually being enforced and followed? Mr. Yang, briefly.
What you do is you go to the small business and say, hey, there's an infraction. We'll give you a cure period, typically 30 days to cure it. And then if they haven't cured it in 30 days, then you can start looking at other ways to impose penalties. But the vast majority of businesses, if they know that there's an issue, they will resolve it. What I've heard right now is horror stories where you get fined $1,000 that you can't afford. You don't show up to the hearing. They double the fine. It's wrong. It's wrong for small business owners who are just
let me
trying to
get
get
you
their
in
feet
on
on
that. 30 seconds.
Yeah, look, that's exactly, Andrew's right. So in the example that I gave, the laundromat said all they had to do was move the sign, and they just didn't let them move the sign. They still fine them when these are small businesses. Remember, small businesses are 50% of our jobs in this city. And what we're doing is not about safety. Where it's about safety, there are lots of steps we have to take. This is about nitpicking and really actually challenging our businesses to stay open. But another thing we have to make clear, we have to make it easier for them to know what the rules are, because so often they have to go to 6 different agencies and get 6 different sets of rules and then constantly figure out how to be in compliance.
So much. Thank you all candidates for this round, which we're out of time for now. Errol, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Candidates, I have a few questions for you. The campaign for mayor is in many ways, first and foremost, a test of one's public record and leadership experience. I have specific questions for each of you in these areas, and I wanted to start with you, Mr. Yang. The fact that you have lived in New York City about a quarter of a century and not voted in a local race was very striking, especially given the very serious issues that were on the ballot throughout those years, including term limits, mayoral control of the schools, the rise and then decline of stop and frisk policing, the potential closure of Rikers Island, and whether to support major developments and rezoning on the west side of Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, and elsewhere. So my question is, why were you absent from those and other key issues over these last couple of decades? And why should voters trust you to engage and care about these key issues now after all of those years?
Thank you, Errol. My family is deeply invested here for the most fundamental of reasons, which is that we're public school parents. Our kids are in school here. We're walking the same streets as everyone else. And if you don't feel safe and secure, we have to turn it around. I would include myself in the approximately 76% of registered Democrats who voted in gubernatorial and presidential elections, but have not been involved locally. But like many New Yorkers, I see that we're in a crisis, and so many of us need to step up in new ways and do everything we can to help. I'm not someone who thinks that all of the energy and ingenuity in our city lies just in government agencies. There's also the private sector, the philanthropic sector, even the tech sector. We're going to need New Yorkers of every background, every industry to get our city back on its feet. And I hope to lead that comeback.
It said in the Hill, Mr. Yang, that you also did not vote in the 2000 presidential race. That was Al Gore versus George W. Bush. I mean, some of these elections were really very consequential for a business owner, for someone raising a family in New York City. Were you pretty much satisfied with the way things were going as far as not participating in those elections?
I believe I did vote in that election. I voted in the presidentials consistently, so I'd have to check that record. But again, like so many of us right now, we see our cities in a really tough spot, and we all need to do everything we can to help. I've certainly been active in other ways. As you know, Errol, I've activated millions around a cash relief movement that has helped get billions of dollars into the hands of New Yorkers. I helped swing those 2 state races in Georgia that have helped deliver the Senate to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and thank goodness for that. If you can imagine that if Mitch McConnell were still the Senate Majority Leader, New Yorkers know that I've done things that might not be the traditional city politics route, but that I've had a positive impact right here in New York City over the last number of years.
Okay.
That's appalling.
My
keep flames for that Georgia race when Black women in Georgia.
Well, just wanted to sort of ask, because these are questions that have been in the news. Ms. Morales, New York has seen, of course, a rise in social movement activity in recent years, including the election of progressive legislators at the state level and the city council. You're seen as aligned with that part of the Democratic Party, but polling by New York One and other organizations suggests that most New York Democrats are more middle of the road and looking for a mayor who pays more attention to trash pickups and public safety and the quality of schooling than the transformation of economic and social relations. If elected, how would you manage those priorities and preferences?
So I think the quick answer is, for me, is that it's not an either or, it's a both and. I think it is possible to make sure that the trash is being collected and that the trains are running on time at the same time that we make sure that Black Lives Matter and that our Black and Brown communities are getting the access to the ability to live in dignity, care, and solidarity that they've never really fully had access to here in the city. I don't think this is a moment in time where we actually get to continue to tinker and just focus on operational things. We actually need to transform and deal with the deeply rooted structural and systemic issues that resulted in this moment in time that we're living in, and the multiple crises that have compounded to really disproportionately impact the people who we hailed as essential workers at 7 p.m. all last summer.
So how well did Mayor de Blasio manage the kind of choices that you and I are talking about? Was he enough of a political leader as far as movement politics, or was there too much or too little focus on providing city services? How do you think he managed it?
I think, unfortunately, that our current mayor fell a little bit short of the execution. I think he came in on a wave of really strong vision for that New Yorkers overwhelmingly bought into and were excited about. But it's not enough to actually be able to articulate a compelling vision. You actually have to be able to have the management skills and executive skills to execute on that and implement from beginning to end. And I think we failed on that.
Okay, thanks very much. Eric Adams, I see you wanted to jump in this conversation.
Well, I just think I heard Andrew say several times of the vote that was delivered in Georgia. That is disrespectful and appalling to Stacey Abrams and those Black women who organized on the ground. I just thought he needs to stop saying that. They won that fight. And we need to give credit.
Go ahead, Mr. Yang.
I would give full credit to Stacey Abrams and the Black and Brown organizers who've been doing work for years in Georgia. Asian Americans are 4.7% of the electorate in Georgia. These races were swung by 1%. I helped raise millions of dollars for those races. So full credit to Stacey and everyone else who's been doing the work for years. But it's okay for other people to contribute to their success.
Yeah, let's agree that. Let's agree that.
A lot of Black women have been there.
Mr. Adams, given how close the race was, let's agree that anybody who sent $1 or spent time making even one phone call helped contribute to the outcome there. Let me ask you this, Mr. Adams. You've been endorsed by the New York Post, which has a conservative editorial board. At one time, you were registered as a Republican, and you have promised to cut the size of city government. What do you say to Democratic primary voters who would be skeptical that those past and current affiliations mean that you're too conservative for New York?
Well, let's deal with each of the three pieces. Number one, many people are not aware, but President Obama was also endorsed by the Post, and he was one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. The Post clearly acknowledged in their endorsement that we disagree with Eric on many things. You can look at some of the editorial board responses, some of the articles by the columnists. They know that this time I bring the skills that are needed to bring our city forward. And second, I'm a Democrat. Two of my heroes in politics, both the Hillary Clinton and our senator, they were once with the GOP. I'm a Democrat. My grandmother was, my grandfather, my mother, my brother. I'm a Democrat, and I know Democratic values. And I've been fighting on behalf of Democrats for over 35 years, and I have the record that people know of what I do. And when I talk about cutting city government, it's saying that we are inefficient in this city, and the inefficiencies are creating the inequities and injustices. We're not cutting those things that we need to ensure that we finally end the inefficiencies in the city. Our budget increased by $20 billion over the last 8 years, and those inefficiencies continue even post-COVID as well as pre-COVID.
Got it.
But Eric, you were a self-described conservative Republican when Rudy Giuliani was mayor, and you actually said that Rudy Giuliani, the father of stop and frisk, who terrorized black people,
hold on.
literally
Miss
was
Wiley, Miss Wiley,
better
Miss Wiley,
than
Miss Wiley.
David Dinkins.
Ms. Wiley.
Better than
He's-
David Dinkins.
Miss Wiley, let him finish. Go ahead.
Actually,
Mr. Adams, you can answer briefly.
Maya, let's be accurate. We all have our own opinions, but we don't have our own facts. There's no.
Oh, Eric, this is a newspaper articles.
There's
This
no
is facts.
If you believe newspaper articles, then you should believe what they
It
said.
was a quote. You were self-described as a conservative Republican.
I think.
I'm happy to post. I'm happy to share the news
Candidates,
Ladies and gentlemen,
let's call an end to that. I asked the question. We got an answer.
everybody.
Those who have an opinion about what it means will make up their own minds. Let me move to Scott Stringer. You, in recent weeks, have been accused of sexual harassment by a former campaign volunteer. You've denied any wrongdoing. What do you think will be the proper venue in which to get to the bottom of these accusations? Is it going to be left up to voters, with your argument being basically, please trust me?
Well, look, first, let me say, I believe it right now, that women have the right and a safe space, I hope, to make any allegations, even if it's inconvenient to me. And I have strenuously denied every one of those allegations. And the voters will probe and ask for facts and for discussion. And I'm happy to answer every part of this. I take it very seriously. My wife is a survivor. We've had long conversations about it, but this is an allegation that's not true. And like the Biden-Tara Reade situation, we have to allow women, and should have women step up and say what they have to say, even, and have a space to do it. But I do think we have to look at fact, and we have to investigate and acknowledge. And I hope the voters will listen to me in the coming weeks.
Okay. And just to be clear, as far as you're concerned, there's no follow-up investigation or anything to be done, that what we know is all we're going to know between now and Election Day?
You have no idea how much I want investigation, resolution, and somebody to listen to the facts. But right now, when you look at the facts, I think it's pretty clear that I'm denying these allegations.
Okay. Ms. Garcia, you certainly have a lot of experience working in government. At this moment, however, of active social movements and a national reckoning with racial and economic injustice and inequality, doesn't New York need a leader who can steer us toward greater equity in ways that go beyond technical improvements to government bureaucracy?
Well, thank you, Errol. I have been a leader in this area by doing things like bringing people together and getting real change in the private garbage truck industry, reducing that by 8 million miles. You know why? Because it was an environmental justice issue. I have led on transfer stations because it was an environmental justice issue. I got the solid waste management plan completed because it was an environmental justice issue. I have been in this fight for all of my career in city government to make this a more equitable place, and work very, very well with some of the most progressive members of the city council to actually deliver. Because I have been boots on the ground, whether or not it was prior to this or during COVID, making sure that I was delivering for New York City residents each and every day.
Okay, thank you very much. Ray McGuire, my question for you is similar to what I asked Mr. Yang. You've enjoyed a substantial and successful career on Wall Street, but you are one of the candidates who has not served in government. And as with Mr. Yang, the question comes up, where were you when our city was wrestling with tough questions around schools and employment and crime and punishment? Did you think things were going well enough all of those years? And why are you getting involved now?
You know, the answer is I never thought they were going well enough. And the reason that I decided to get into the race is because, in fact, they are not going well at all. You got 100+ years of experience on the screen in government, some failed government. And look at where we are today. We have inequities that exist in healthcare. We got inequities that exist in education. We clearly got inequities that exist in the economy, and we got inequities that exist in the criminal justice system. The reason that I decided to leave what I was doing to get involved is it's a life of service, but the city now needs a leader in whom they can trust and whom they can believe, who in the private sector, where I'm known by my deeds and not my words, not by some false advertisement, by the actual things I've done, investing in education and things like De La Salle Academy, which is a school for 6th to 8th grade Black and brown boys, women of all men and young women below the poverty line, or George Jackson Academy, a school for Black and brown boys, or Harlem School of the Arts, or Arts Connection that puts arts in our schools. So if you look at the track record of things in which I've been involved in the private sector, the reason I decided to get involved is because all of those had their chance and we're going backward, which is why the crisis is so profound and in many instances profane. We need a new leader who can bring about a change.
Okay.
That's why I got into this race.
Okay, thank you. My next question is from Ms. Wiley. Your campaign is based around reform. You, of course, have served as a top aide and appointee to Bill de Blasio, providing advice on ethics issues that later became a source of legal problems for the mayor. Bill de Blasio is heading into his final months in office with some very low ratings on job performance. Do you take any responsibility for any of the mayor's missteps?
You know, Errol, one important fact to note that you left out is that I quit 5 years ago. I voted with my feet in 2016. And look, as someone who spent my whole career as a civil rights advocate, I'm proud of the opportunity to get every single apartment in Queensbridge houses free broadband. I'm proud to have helped get the first sanctuary city law passed in this city that helped protect undocumented immigrants from ICE. I'm proud that we got women and minority-owned business contracts up from $500 million when I got a title with no resources and no staffing, up to $1.6 billion in 1 year, matched it the second year, but also created the accountability, created a disparity study in order to identify whether we were doing well enough for Black and Latino businesses, and we weren't. But here's the thing. I have never hesitated to stand up and say what I thought, including this summer when Mayor de Blasio defended Commissioner Shea, who told us not to believe our lying eyes about the batoning by police officers of peaceful protesters. And I will always stand true to what I see and what I believe and what I've done for my whole career.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Donovan. New York has spent a generation implementing various campaign finance reforms, including limits on campaign spending, the creation of a generous matching funds program. Now, you are accepting the matching funds, but your father has spent millions of dollars to finance a supposedly independent outside group created to promote your candidacy with television ads. A preliminary look at this by the Campaign Finance Board says that the arrangement does not appear to break its rules, but doesn't it violate the spirit of the reforms that New York has spent a generation putting in place?
Well, Errol, let's be clear. There are dozens of these groups supporting almost every candidate that's in this race. And in fact, Scott Stringer had 17 of these groups when he ran for comptroller in 2013.
Don't get me involved in your daddy's problems. Nope.
I want to be clear.
Let him finish. Let him finish. Let him finish. Let him finish.
I'm not getting involved in that.
Let him finish.
Look, let's be clear that when I have conversations with New Yorkers, they are focused on the issues in their daily lives. This is a moment of crisis, and this is not the issue that I am hearing about or that folks are focused on.
Well,
they're not worried about PACs. They're worried about plans, and they're worried about making sure that we have a mayor who is not a rookie at this point, that is not a part of the failed status quo, but that can actually bring us forward and recover from what is the worst crisis we've seen in this city in a generation. That is what I'm focused on. Those are the issues that I'm hearing about every day. I've dedicated my life to public service, and this is a moment we need a public servant, not a politician, someone who has deep experience to be able to lead.
My name was called.
Candidates, we promised you all a short break. We're going to do that in a minute, but first let's go to Brian Lehrer for a short lightning round.
Thanks, Errol. And very short on the way into this break, just 3 questions. There'll be yes or no questions, a show of hands, and I'll translate for the radio audience. Okay, first question. should all future New York City police officers be required to live in New York City? Who says yes? Raise your hand. So that is everybody. That was easy. Next one. Well, a listener to my show submits this question that goes well in a lightning round. Once COVID vaccines are approved for regular use, no longer just emergency use, depending on the age group, do you favor requiring students in those age groups to be vaccinated, as many colleges are doing right now? Who would require the students to be vaccinated? Garcia, Stringer, Donovan, Yang, the rest are no's on that. And for those of you who raised your hand, yes, would you also require staff to be vaccinated? Any of you? None of you would require teachers to be vaccinated or other staff. And final one, will you commit to making the composting program citywide? Raise your hand if the answer is yes for a commitment on that. Do I see everybody except Mr. Yang? So there you go, and that's that lightning round.
I love
Errol, back to you.
composting, just not, I wanted to roll it out in parts of the city first. That's all. I love composting.
Just not enough, I guess.
It's not citywide. Like, you have to roll it out in certain parts where you have the resources, and it makes more
Errol, back
sense.
to you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, candidates. We're going to take a very short break here. We'll be right back with our cross-examination round. That's when each candidate will get a chance to directly ask one question of one opponent. We'll be back in exactly 2 minutes with the primary debate for mayor of New York City. Stay with us.
Yeah, I'm watching it too. I see them every day.
Curtains. They're always drawn in this place.
I know.
Oh my, a commercial. This is not what we were expecting. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Matt Skidmore Show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first Democratic mayoral debate. We're currently in a commercial break. We'll be getting back live with the candidates in a few minutes. And let us know in the comments, what do you think of the debate so far? Who's winning? Let us know. You can vote. There's 8 candidates. Just put the name of the candidate that you think is winning the debate in the chat right now. And we'll see what you guys pick. Oh, is the debate back? Hold up. It looks like it's back.
On New York One, also available on the Spectrum News app, exclusively on Spectrum.
New York can be a lot.
Oh, head fake. It's not back. All right, I see Yang, Morales, Garcia, Yang, Dianne, Somebody says they're all losing. That's a good take. Yang, Morales, Yang, Wiley, Yang. I'll tell you guys, my favorite part of this debate so far was when Maya Wiley went at Eric Adams for being a former Republican. Because Eric Adams, he literally once said that he's running as a Democrat in a Democratic primary. And no offense to all the Adams fans out there. I'm sure there's a lot of you. However, he's running as a Democrat in a Democratic primary. And he once said that the Republican part, what was it? He was like, if you look at the values of the Republican Party, you'll see that many of them are actually our values. It's like, what? All right. Ooh, debate's back.
Welcome back to the first official Democratic primary debate in the race for mayor. I'm Spectrum News New York One political anchor Errol Louis. It's time for the cross-examination round. That's when each candidate will get a chance to ask one question of one rival. Our order was selected at random. We begin with Dianne Morales. You may ask a question.
Great. So I'd like to ask a question of Eric, actually. Eric, last week, I believe you referenced the defund the police movement, and you talked about it being driven by young, white, affluent people. What do you say to the Black organizers of all ages, many of whom I've had the privilege of organizing and working with on the ground, who have in fact been leading this movement for decades? What do you say to them about how your statement erases their work and removes them from having a voice in the movement?
Dianne, it was the disband movement that I was speaking of, not the defund movement. It was the disband movement.
What's the disband movement?
That is the movement to disband police departments across the entire country. I am watching what's happening in Portland. I'm watching the anarchy that's taking place, and I saw the anarchy of those who came to this city, burning police vehicles, burning stores, burning private homes. Those anarchists that are coming in various cities across America, trying to disband police department. Policing has a role in the ecosystem of public safety. We need to define what that role is. It's the disband movement.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Thank you for clarifying.
Next question is from Andrew Yang. You may ask a question.
Thanks, Errol. Dianne, this is a question for you. I've heard you say positive things about cash relief and universal basic income. Los Angeles, Chicago, Newark are all rolling out versions. As you all know, I've championed a major cash relief effort to help alleviate poverty here in New York City. Do you agree that cash relief is a vital part of trying to help people here in New York?
Yes, I think providing immediate cash relief, which is actually something I called for at the beginning of the pandemic, so that we could keep people home safely and get the pandemic under control and not have people feel like they had to put their lives at risk. I think that's a critical piece, but I want to be sure and clear, actually, that it is not a long-term solution, nor is it the ultimate answer to the deeply rooted systemic and structural issues that result in the inequities in terms of how the multiple pandemics that existed before COVID impact Black and Brown communities, immigrant communities, the low income and the working class folks, or whether we're talking about access to housing or access to quality education or access to jobs that enable them to live in dignity and provide for their families.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question comes from Scott Stringer.
Well, let's see. Andrew Yang. We had a municipal corruption scandal at City Hall where lobbyists and consultants got unfettered access to the inner workings of our government. They were protected by something known as agents of the city, where they sort of got a hall pass. You have some lobbyists and consultants working your campaign. Will you join me in making sure that we don't give access to the power brokers in an administration, no matter who becomes mayor?
I couldn't agree more, Scott. We need a mayor who's not beholden to special interests, who'll just make decisions based upon what's best for the people and families of the city. And everyone watching this knows that I have my own vision, my own plans, my own agenda. When I ran for president, no one was talking about cash relief or universal basic income. It was considered marginal. And now a majority of Americans are for it. And we were living versions of it in the $1,200 check, the $600 check, the $1,400 check. And now this child poverty tax credit that's going to be a game changer. So Scott, I could not agree with you more. We need to make sure that the government is actually for the people and free of special interest obligations.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Kathryn Garcia.
Thank you. And I want to raise a topic that hasn't come up yet this evening, which is the LGBTQ community. And Dianne Morales, this question is for you. I know you've done so much work in this area. What do you think the highest priority needs to be for the next mayor?
It is specific to the LGBT community?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Yeah. I think we need to make sure that it's different and yet not for the LGBT community. I think we need to make sure that they are safe. It is the violence that our Black transgender community in particular faces and deals with, the fatality, the murders. That is something we need to make sure that the Black trans community in particular has access to safety and protections, and that they can walk our streets without having to worry about that. And that includes decriminalizing sex work. And it includes, getting rid of the Nordic model as well, so that they can actually be safe and live in dignity with care and solidarity in our city, just like everybody else has the right to.
Okay, thank you. Next question comes from Eric Adams.
Yes, Andrew, I have talked about the shootings in Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, South Bronx, stood on the Bronx step house, courtroom steps to talk about this. And you did not, of my knowledge, respond to any of these shootings. There was no real conversation about the large number of Black and Brown people who were the victims of gun violence. 95% of the victims are Black and Brown. But there was a shooting blocks from your home, and you immediately held a press conference. Do you feel you should apologize to those Black and Brown families that witnessed shootings in their communities and there was nothing that came from you?
As a parent and a New Yorker, it's painful when you see the tragedies unfolding in so many of our communities. And you're totally right, Eric, that Black and Brown communities have borne the brunt of this surge in gun violence. Their parents will never see their kids again. It's heartbreaking. It's wrong. I'm with you that we have to do everything we can to help. And you and I are aligned on some of the things that we have to do to try and make our streets and communities safer. We have to work with the leaders in those communities, but we do need an anti-violence and community safety unit of plainclothes cops to go in, work with community leaders and try and get the guns out and the rates of violence down. We need focused deterrence so we can target the folks who are actually perpetrating this violence before it happens, because people in communities know who's scary, who's tough, who might actually wind up in a violent situation a little while later. We have to be there before the fact so families aren't mourning in the way that unfortunately far too many have.
Okay. Next question comes from Maya Wiley.
Well, let me just quickly say I'm proud to have an ethics plan to protect from the lobbyist revolving doors and to disclose everything that the public needs to know to trust government. But my question is to Eric Adams. Eric, 685,000 people, 85% Black, 88% innocent. That's what stop and frisk was at its height, that my former organization, the ACLU, proclaimed a racist practice and won a court case on. And just a year ago, you called it a great tool and have said that you used it. And I just want to know, because as a civil rights lawyer, all I can say is there was nothing okay about it. And it certainly was nothing more than lazy policing, certainly kept people's constitutional rights violated. How can New Yorkers trust you to protect us and to keep us safe from police misconduct?
You know, thank you so much, Maya. And every time you raise that question, it really just shows your failure of understanding law enforcement. So let me give you
well, having chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, I certainly understand misconduct.
And yes, you chaired it, and we both know that how much it was a failure under you. But
getting Daniel Pantaleo.
Let him finish. Let him finish, please. Let him answer.
I told everyone at the beginning of the race, once candidates start getting desperate, it's going to get really nasty, you know? So Maya, let me share this with you. Let me give you some facts. I was the leading voice against the abuse of stop and frisk. Everyone knows that. I was the leading voice. I testified in federal court. The federal judge used my testimony to make her decision. If you do a Google search, you will find from the mid-90s throughout my entire career, I talked about the abuse of stop and frisk. I partnered with Hakeem Jeffries, who's now the congressman, and introduced a bill in Albany that talked about, number one, the illegal use of quotas, and number two, keeping a database from stop and frisk. When you use stop and frisk—
Database.
Okay.
A database.
When you use stop and frisk, if someone is hiding in an alleyway, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the police officers stop him, question him on what he's doing there, That is a legal stop. That is how you're supposed to use
You and I both know that the reason that 88% of people were innocent who were stopped and frisked is because it wasn't actually about anybody who was doing anything wrong in the first place. In fact, the biggest excuse
Maya, tell me
was
something.
about the way people looked.
Maya,
I've seen the cases. I've watched them. That's why we got
Maya,
down.
Let him respond, and then we're going to move on.
Maya, did you speak up on this issue at all? Is there any place I could?
Yes.
Maya,
Yes, actually, because I've spent my whole life as a racial justice advocate,
That's not what I'm talking about.
including creating a criminal justice initiative in post-apartheid South
I think we have aired this issue. We got a question, we got an answer, we got an exchange. Thank you. The next question comes from Ray McGuire.
Yeah, I want to direct it to Andrew Yang. Andre, you have talked about technology being part of your platform going forward. At Venture for America, your mission was to help participants succeed in the tech sector. But you said the following: the program might simply not be the best fit for Black applicants. How can New Yorkers trust you with creating and managing a budget that will equitably benefit every single neighborhood in every single borough if your program was not fit for Black applicants?
Thanks, Ray. We have to do more for the communities that are getting hurt the most right now. And my administration would reflect the incredible diversity of our city. I'm so proud of the work that Venture for America did. We were honored not once, but twice by the Obama administration. And the fact is, we were taking young people who are aspiring entrepreneurs and putting them often in really difficult environments where there was a lot of failure, a lot of adversity, to some degree, like a degree of racism, because we know that unfortunately there's a lot of inequity in the tech sector and in entrepreneurship. And so we actually ended up becoming one of the major pipelines for Black and brown and minority graduates and women. And we ended up helping ease some of the inequities in the tech and entrepreneurship space. But I completely agree with you that we have to do much, much more to try and balance it out, because if you look at the tech sector right now, it does not represent New York City very well. It doesn't represent our people, or really the people of any environment, because we all know what these tech companies look like.
Do you regret saying that?
Oh, Ray, it was like a hypothetical where I was posing it to my team in order to challenge our thinking. But if you look at the numbers, we were working in Detroit, New Orleans, Cleveland, cities that were majority Black, and our fellow representation actually ended up increasing the diversity in the firms we worked with.
So my question is simple. Do you regret saying that?
I actually don't even remember saying that, but I like, if you say that, it's documented somewhere, I didn't want to come and say, hey, I didn't say that. But I genuinely don't remember making that statement.
Okay.
Andrew, the New York Times article was 80% white.
Let's leave it at that. Let's leave it at that. Shaun Donovan has a question to ask.
Well, first of all, let me just say, as a member of the Obama administration, I'm offended to hear Andrew hide behind that community's for Change award. It was about promise and not results. And I think so often we've seen promises from him, but not results.
Well,
this is
Shaun,
not time. This is not time for a rookie as mayor. This is the most consequential election of our lifetimes. This is not time for a rookie as mayor. But I want to ask my question to Eric Adams. And Eric, we've talked a lot about gun violence and the terrible destruction it's having in our city, particularly in Black and brown communities. And I do want to say, you have said that you would carry a gun as mayor repeatedly. And, I've heard you say you would ask the police whether they thought there was a threat. But isn't this a question to ask the voters of New York? Leadership matters. And the mayor of New York is one of the most important positions in this country. And as a New Yorker, but also as a parent, I'm deeply concerned about the idea of a mayor who carries a gun at a time where gun violence is spiking and we're losing so many people in New York. So I really do want to hear you answer, not from the police side, but as mayor, how can you justify carrying a gun?
Well, Shaun, thank you for that. And I believe you asked that question the other day and I answered it, but I will answer it again for you now. As a retired member of the New York City Police Department, I'm authorized to carry a gun 24 hours a day. And while I was retired, I never carried my gun, but while I was off duty, I have taken police actions many times to save the lives of people who are victims of serious crimes. And as I stated to you the other day when we spoke about this, I would carry it if this threat assessment unit in the police department stated, Eric, there's a credible threat to you. I'm also going to reduce the size of the mayor's detail. I think it is hypocritical to state that the city is safe, but we're walking around with 5 and 6 members of your detail. We could cut that down to 2 and put those officers to protect the public. And that is why I'm authorized to carry a gun. I don't carry it now. I have not carried it since I left the police department. But if there's a serious threat that I'm told by the threat assessment unit, I will carry that gun. And that is something that you know and I know. I have been a leader on guns in this country, on reducing the number of guns on our street. I am a leader. And you know what? I have a record, Shaun. You know why I have a record? Because many people have been absent on this issue. You know my record because I have a record.
Okay.
But what about the example it
Let's
sets
leave it
for
there.
New Yorkers?
Let's leave
for our
let
children.
Candidates, let's leave it right there. We're coming down the home stretch. We've got about 24 minutes left in our debate. Let's go to Brian Lehrer.
Thank you, Errol. And with the clock being what it is, I'm going to enforce 60-second answers in this round. My apologies in advance if I cut any of you off. 60-second answers to what I admit is a complex area in New York City, and that is our public education system. In a city where the system has been labeled the most desegregated big city school system in America, a listener to my show, identifying as Beth from Brooklyn, writes, as a remote teacher this year, I have seen the vast inequities. What will the next mayor do to address this? So what I'm going to ask you to do in 60 seconds is name one signature policy of yours for education disparity or fighting education disparity in outcomes in New York City. And 60 seconds, Mr. Donovan, you haven't gotten to go first yet tonight, so we'll start with you.
Well, Brian, first of all, we can't end segregation in our schools without ending segregation in our housing. And I led the fight to give real meaning to the Fair Housing Act when I was housing secretary for President Obama. In fact, when Donald Trump still had a Twitter account, he was lobbing racist attacks at my work to make sure people could live wherever they choose in this city and this country. And that has to be a key part of achieving real equality in our communities. But in the school system, I think one of the most important things that we can do, there are many, and my education plan was called by the New York Times the most comprehensive and detailed of any of the candidates. We're running the campaign of ideas. Specifically, we have fewer than 45% teachers of color in a system that's more than 85% kids of color. And we know that if a student of color has a teacher of color by 3rd grade, they're far more likely to graduate.
Okay, thank
from
you,
high
Mr.
school.
Donovan, and that's
So
the
that's
60
the key area.
seconds, Mr. Yang.
Just today, I stood with State Senator Toby Stavisky and declared that we're going to have an education opportunity fund that's going to put $1,000 into the hands of families that have a child who is either below the poverty line, an English language learner, or has an IEP. This $1,000 will go to after-school programs, individual tutoring, speech therapy, things that many of these children need that they don't have the money for. And this is deeply personal for me because I have a special needs child. I remember when we received his autism diagnosis, and for us at least, it was a relief because we were struggling so much as first-time parents. And we had the resources to be able to help our son get some of the extra help that he needed. But so many families in New York City do not. Many of them are immigrant Black and brown families.
And
They're
that's
struggling
the
with a special
60
needs
seconds.
child.
Thank you, Mr.
This
Yang. We'll go
education
next to
opportunity
Ms.
fund is going to help.
Garcia. Your one signature policy for reducing educational disparities.
Hard to pick just one, so you should go to the whole plan at kgfornyc.com. But we need to stop talking about education as a scarcity. My plan to expand the number of high schools and use the University of Texas model, which means taking the top 10% from any middle school based on grade point average, has seen real results, not only about racial integration, but also economic integration. I want to bring that thinking to New York City's DOE. You know, I'm a product of the public school system. I know we can do a great job in educating our kids. We need to fully fund every school. How is it possible that some elementary schools don't have libraries? This is really the craziness, that there are disparities in funding right this second. That means there are disparities in.
Thank you very much. And we're going to go next to Ms. Wiley.
You know, I attended a segregated, overcrowded, underfunded elementary school when I was young. And I was proud to co-chair the School Diversity Advisory Group, where we came up with 200 pages of recommendations. I have a plan, but I'm going to start with hiring 2,500 new teachers, because our most overcrowded schools, 618 of them, are usually also our segregated Black and Latino schools. That is going to help us improve the quality of education. It is going to help us diversify our teachers so that they look like students. We know that helps. But I'm also the first candidate to put out a gun violence prevention plan. And in that plan, I talk about putting trauma-informed care in our schools, because our kids are traumatized and that impacts their learning. And we're going to ensure they have all the supports and services to succeed.
Thank you very much. Ms. Morales.
Yes. So the first thing I'm going to say is that we can't wait to desegregate housing in order to desegregate our schools. As the only former educator, classroom teacher in this race, as the mother of 2 public school graduates, both of whom had IEPs, I am committing to, in my first 100 days, an education executive order that will immediately begin to desegregate our schools. That means removing all barriers to access and all screenings. It means including redrawing boundaries of our school districts to make sure that there's increased access across the board, making sure that we're ending the SHSAT, maximizing our newly One Fair Student funding formula, and increasing and expanding our teacher pipelines in partnership with CUNY so that we actually have teachers that are reflective of our students, as well as implementing a culturally responsive curriculum and removing police from our schools and instead replacing them with supportive services that we know our students need.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Mr. Stringer.
Brian, I just want to be clear. I didn't say that we should wait to desegregate our schools. We have to do both at the same time. And Dianne, you know that.
That is what you said, though.
Mr.
You
Stringer.
can play back the tape.
Ooh, that's feisty.
I said we need to do both. And I have the most comprehensive plan in the race.
My turn.
All right, Mr. Stringer, yes, it
We
is
need
your
to do
turn.
both.
My turn.
Go
All
ahead.
right, look, Brian, I'm a failed remote learning teacher. I have a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader, and it was tough, like for so many parents. But I have a lot of privilege. I have a credit card. I could make up for lost learning. But what I know is around this city, the kids in homeless shelters that didn't have remote access, the kids in public housing who didn't have internet access, we got to have a real plan on day one to bring our school system back to life. Here's my plan. First, triple the number of kids in NYC under 3 so we get childcare to send parents back to the workforce. Second, we got to do what the privates and the charters are doing and the wealthy parents are doing. We need 2 teachers K-5 in every classroom because we need to focus our kids and give them every resource. 3, we have to have outside opportunity for kids to have chess, to have robotics and athletics. We need to have after school that's equal around the city. And I'm going to put $200 million to do that. And I'll stop
Thank you
now. 'cause
very
I know my
much.
minute
And
is-
finally, one signature policy to reduce disparities in education. Mr. Adams, 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. And when you look at the most Democratic candidates that have endorsed me, I'm proud of the over 20 plus years of being a proud Democrat. I know that if you don't educate, you will incarcerate. 65% of Black and brown children don't meet proficiency every year. We have to return the joy of learning in schools. We must have universal testing for dyslexia. One study shows that 30% of the prison population, they are dyslexic. We must look at the fair student funding to not only look at inside the schools, but what are the conditions around the schools. And then we must ensure that our individual children, not only what they learn, but how they learn. And I'm going to focus on that.
Thank you very much. I apologize to Mr. McGuire. I accidentally skipped over you, so you get the last word in this round.
Thank you. Listen, there are very few things that are more fundamental than education. Education is what got me here. With all due respect, what is being described is that which is attempting to go against what is a crisis in education. The system doesn't work. It has not worked. If I randomly take 10 black and brown fourth graders, 2, maybe 3 can read. So the system needs to go from being this random pre-K to 12 to something that completely transformed. My plan is called Cradle to Career. You can see it at rayformayor.com. The signature component of this is going to be making certain that no child leaves the 3rd grade without the ability to read and do math. Because all the educators will tell you that between 0 and 3, our children are learning to read. After that, they're reading to learning. We've lost far too many whom we didn't teach how to read. And then we're going to go forward to make certain that in the 8th grade, our children get exposed to summer jobs, career opportunities, including vocational careers. So by the time they graduate, they can do 1 of 3 things. You go to those career jobs, they can go to a 2-year or 4-year college, but I want to be accountable for how our children get educated. And that's the way you got to look at it.
We're going to finish the education set with 2 quick hand-raising questions. First one is, should the city still offer a full-time remote option for families who want it in September? Who would say yes, full-time remote option should be available? I think I'm seeing 0 hands. Mr. Adams raises his hand for a full-time remote option, and so does Mr. Stringer. Okay, and please raise your hands if you support keeping the SHSAT exam as the only criterion for admission to the specialized high schools like Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech. Raise your hands if the test should continue to be the only criteria. Ms. Garcia is raising her hand. Mr. Adams is raising his hand for only criteria, and only those 2. Candidates, thank you so much. Back to Errol.
All right. Thank you, Brian. We're going to turn now to Josefa Velasquez for our next question.
Thank you, Errol. So we want to talk about homelessness. We know this is a topic that is immensely important to a lot of New Yorkers, so we would appreciate it if you honored them by keeping your answers concise. Tens of thousands of adults are living in shelters or on our city's streets and subways. Pre-pandemic, Mayor de Blasio's solution was to build out dormitory-style shelters for every part of the city. Mr. Stringer, let's start with you. As mayor, would you continue on the path of building citywide shelters?
572,000 people are 1 step away from homelessness. And tonight, over 60,000 people, half are children, are going to sleep in very dangerous shelters. That is not the solution. Everyone talks about how to solve the homeless crisis, but no one talks about giving homeless people a home with supportive services. What I would do as mayor is have a housing plan that actually builds low-income housing for the people who need it. And the way we do that is we access our vacant land, set up a land bank and a land trust, give the land back to the people instead of wealthy developers, and build housing that reflects the income of our shelters and the people in our city. This plan would be able to be implemented immediately. Second, I would implement my universal affordable housing plan. Every new development, 10 units or more, would set aside 25% affordable housing. We keep tinkering on the edges between the mayor and the city council, 20 units of affordable housing, 30 units. But the reality is the housing we built over the last 8 years is unaffordable, affordable housing in so many of our communities.
Okay.
My bold housing plan.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Let's move on to Ms. Morales.
Yes, I believe that, first of all, housing is a human right, and everyone in New York City should have access to permanent and affordable housing. In my first 100 days, I would move to appoint a deputy mayor responsible for leading and coordinating a citywide cross-sector effort addressing our issues and challenges around homelessness, making sure that all of the agencies related to housing are actually working together and coordinating, and making sure that we are actually also converting promptly any vacant spaces that are available and at our disposal into permanent housing, hotels, commercial storefronts, office spaces, anything that is available that is at our disposal, we should be converting to permanent affordable housing. We should not be perpetuating the shelter industrial complex. We also need to undertake an equitable planning system that ensures that moving forward, we are looking ahead for the long term and planning accordingly and involving communities in that process.
Thank you, Ms. Morales. Mr. McGuire, over to you. Would you continue to build citywide shelter networks? If not, what would you do?
The answer is no, I would not continue to build citywide homeless shelters. You know, I was talking the other day, 7:30 or so in the morning at a subway stop. And I struck up a conversation with a person who was in a wheelchair who was homeless. And he said, you know, Ray, the thing that I want is I want just a roof over my head and just a hot pot and a stove or a refrigerator. And he said, you know, I don't want to go to the shelters because I fear for my life. They're dangerous in the shelters. So my plan is to build deeply affordable housing. There is an example of this called the Bronx Common, 163rd Street and Melrose, where we're housing an extraordinary complex. We have those who are formerly homeless, $225 a month, all the way up to rents of $1,999 a month for a 3-bedroom. We know we can do it. It has facilities for our elderly, which my plan calls for the elders. It has a gymnasium. It is powered by solar panels, and it also has an indoor-outdoor concert hall. So there are ways that we can do this, and my plan calls for going from homelessness to homeownership.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Ms. Garcia, how would you handle this topic if you're elected mayor?
We have to fundamentally change our approach. Shelters are a Band-Aid for the solution to a long-term problem. We have to put housing first because you know what? Housing heals. It makes it so you can keep a job. It makes it so your kids can get a better education. And it actually physically keeps you healthier. That is why my plan includes increasing the voucher amount to something you might actually be able to rent in the city of New York, for those of us who knew the answer to that question. To make it so that we build 50,000 units of affordable housing, that we build 10,000 units of supportive housing, that we are creating safe haven beds for those who need it. We have to be a city that makes it so that housing is foundational for families. And I have been responsible for building over $8 billion worth of capital projects. I understand how to get this done.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. And Mr. Yang, let's go to you. What's your plan for the homeless of New York?
There are at least 3 elements to what we have to do for the homeless population. The first is we need more permanent affordable housing. The sheltering system is not meant to be permanent. Unfortunately, the average stay in our sheltering system has gone up by 30%, which has caused all sorts of issues and bottlenecks. And one of the bottlenecks is that we haven't gotten the supportive housing we need because the mayor and the governor haven't been on the same page. It's one thing that's holding us back. So I agree with Dianne that we should be converting Class B commercial office space that's suitable for housing conversions as quickly as possible into permanent affordable housing. I agree with Kathryn that we need to increase the level of vouchers so that it actually gets people out of the sheltering system. I do want to make a distinction for the people watching, though. We're talking about the sheltering homeless population and then the street homeless population, which has its own set of issues. The street homeless population, I've committed to reducing by 50% or more. And the way we do that is by investing in safe haven beds, psych beds, supportive housing, and a better standard of intervention, where if someone is in distress and on our streets, they do not belong on our streets. We have to get them to a better environment for their sake and the city's sake.
To everyone on this topic, and we have a very limited amount of time. Mr. Donovan, you were formerly the head of HUD under President Obama. What's your plan for the rising number of homeless people in New York City?
You know, other candidates talk the talk on this. I've walked the walk. As a kid growing up in this city, I was outraged to see homelessness exploding on our streets in the wealthiest city on earth. Today, we have more homeless people in this city than any time since the Depression. Homelessness is a solvable problem, and I know that because I've solved it. When I was housing commissioner in this city, we cut the number of individuals on our streets and in shelter by 1/3. I helped during the Great Recession, millions of families stay in their homes. And when I led the homelessness strategy for President Obama, we dramatically reduced homelessness around this country. We ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities. And in fact, yesterday I got off the subway and Willie Boyd walked up to me. And he said to me that his father had been a veteran whose life was saved by supportive housing that we'd helped build. Saved his life. We can do that in New York with the right leadership. And I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually solved it. We need to keep people in their homes. We're on the verge of the worst eviction crisis of our lifetimes.
All
We
right,
need
thank
to
you, Mr.
reimagine
Donovan.
our right
Move
to
on the
shelter
other
in the city
candidates.
as a right to
All right,
housing.
so Ms. Wiley, what's your plan for the homeless of New York?
No, I spent a lot of time up on the Upper West Side with the Open Hearts Upper West Side and the men who had been street homeless who were in the Lucerne. And Shams DeBaron, the homeless hero, someone who supports me in this campaign, has so rightly said, you know, eviction is the homelessness crisis, and we need a housing first strategy. So 3 things. I already have my New Deal New York plan, which is going to be money and resources that are used in part to build affordable housing that people can truly afford. But secondly, we have the opportunity with the vacancy crisis that COVID has created to create more housing first for folks who are homeless. Third, we have to recognize this city has 1,000 acres of land it owns. And rather than selling it off, that is our opportunity to partner with not-for-profit housing developers in order to create more permanently, 100% permanently affordable housing. Again,
Thank you,
deeply
Ms.
affordable.
Wiley. We need to get to one final person. Mr. Adams, what would you do? Would you continue on the path of creating a citywide shelter network, or is there an alternative?
Well, first of all, homelessness is a moral failure by our city and our country. And I know what housing insecurity is about. You know, I tell all the time of carrying a garbage bag full of clothing to school every day as a child because my mother thought we were going to be thrown out of our home and she wanted us to have a change of clothing. We need to properly identify the 3 areas of homelessness: children and families, the largest increase in our shelters, single adults, and we're going to get an increasing number of single adults that are coming home from correctional facilities, and finally, those with mental health illnesses. I don't think we could wait 2 to 3 years to deal with it. We're going to deal with street homelessness immediately by investing in those supportive housing like Fountain House, an amazing initiative, 85% stability rate. That is where we need to be going. And then increase the FEPS voucher to keep people in their home in the first place and retrofit hotels, micro units, and other areas so we could deal with adults.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. So we just want to touch on the topic of NYCHA briefly since we only have a couple of minutes left. So by a show of hand, and please keep them up because it might take a second to count everyone, New York City's public housing system is home to more than 500,000 New Yorkers. But there's been a steady decline in state and federal investments that's left a lot of these properties in serious disrepair, and it would cost $40 billion to fix them. So by a show of hands, one way to fix these ailing properties is to have private companies take over the management of some of these developments. Do you support it? Please raise your hand if you do.
I'm sorry, support what?
Public housing has to stay public.
Do you support having private companies take over the management of some of the NYCHA developments?
This is not the way you save public housing. It's a question of the funding we need, the $40 billion.
Public housing has to stay public.
We actually finally need HUD to actually give us the money that we need, but if they don't, I'll match it with city and state funding.
No, there is a plan on the table.
All right. So for all of our listeners who are on the radio and can't see it, none of the candidates raised their hands. We're on the home stretch, folks. So I'm sure Errol will have a lot more to say. So Errol, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Josepha. Candidates, we're going to go just a couple of minutes over the top of the hour, which is in 1 minute. We're almost out of time. I want to squeeze in a few more short lightning round type questions. Please keep your answers to yes or no or just a few words. So candidates, what is the first cultural event, whether it's Broadway or sports or otherwise, that you plan to attend when the city reopens? Mr. Donovan.
Well, I've already been doing that. I went to see Jewel Box on Skirmerhorn the other day, Brooklyn Ballet, amazing performances.
Okay,
we should be opening up our storefronts all over this city, filling them with arts and culture, our public spaces. We should do that right now.
Mr. McGuire, where do you plan to go?
Museum.
Very good. Ms. Wiley.
Well, I'm actually doing it virtually already with the Strokes on Saturday, who are supporting me in this race.
True, rock and roll.
Broadway.
Mr. Adams.
You know, everyone is talking about the big places, but you know what? The small places matter as well. Sister's Place off of downtown, off of Fulton Street.
Got it. Ms. Garcia.
I want to go to a Brooklyn Cyclones game and throw out another first pitch.
There you go. Mr. Stringer.
After this campaign, wherever my wife Elise wants to go on Broadway, we're going.
The proper answer, of course, whatever the wife wants. Mr. Yang.
Let's go Mets. I agree. The city's already open for a lot of these events, but we're looking forward to Broadway being back, hopefully this fall.
Okay, Ms. Morales.
I'm going to take my daughter, who was a musical theater major in high school here at Talent Unlimited. I'm going to take her back to a Broadway show.
Okay, there you go. Ms. Morales, when you have extra work that is piling up, do you get up early to tackle it or do you stay up late?
I stay up late.
Okay, Mr. Yang.
Definitely stay up late.
Mr. Stringer.
You know, I used to do it late. Now with the kids, I get up as early as I can.
Yeah, you're up anyway. Ms. Garcia.
Yeah.
Oh, I think everybody knows that I'm the early bird.
Okay, there you go. Mr. Adams.
5:30 a.m. meditation and then straight to doing that work.
There you go. Ms. Wiley.
Early bird up and making the chocolate chip peanut butter protein muffins to get through the rest of the day.
All right. Mr. McGuire.
Stay up late, get up early.
There you go.
No time for that.
There you go. Burn it on both ends. Mr. Donovan.
I am an all of the above kind of guy too. Early and late if I need to.
Okay. I'd like each of you to name a rival here tonight who you would like voters to rank as a number 2 choice. Mr. Donovan.
Well, I've said a number of times that I have deep respect for the civil rights work that Maya's done.
Okay.
I've been engaged in that civil rights work myself for decades and would support her second.
Maya Wiley. Mr. McGuire.
You know, that's a tough one, but I'd like to think that what Kathryn Garcia has done here is respectable.
There you go. Ms. Wiley.
I've said for a long time, it's Dianne Morales is a long time justice advocate and activist.
Mr. Adams.
Still looking at, I think all the candidates bring a special quality, and I'm still looking at who would be, I would ask to do the number 2.
No answer? Oh, Ms. Garcia.
Oh, you know I haven't answered this question. You've asked me a couple of times. I feel like I don't have a number 2 now, and I'll let you know as soon as I decide.
Okay, Mr. Stringer.
No number 2 yet. Still trying to get to number 1.
Okay, Mr. Yang.
Kathryn Garcia has delivered a ton of value for the people of New York City. She'd be my number 2.
Okay, and Ms. Morales.
You know, I've said this too. It's been fun to watch folks come a little bit closer to both my platform and using my language. And so I'm looking forward to waiting to see how close we can get people. And that's how I'll decide my number 2.
All right, 30 seconds left. Show of hands. Have you ever voted for a Republican? For the radio audience, no hands went up. I was going to give you extra credit if you told us who, but the answer is nobody. Thanks so much, candidates. You've been great sports. That is going to do it for tonight's debate. As a reminder, there will be 2 more Campaign Finance Board sponsored debates among the Democratic candidates for mayor before the primary, which happens on June. Those new debates, additional debates will happen on June 2nd and another on June 16th. And there are also plans to bring you a debate featuring the Republican candidates. That happens on May 26th. We'll also have a Democratic debate for city controller. That's on June 10th. For now, thanks to all of the candidates.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to the first New York City mayoral Democratic debate featuring 8 candidates. The primary is on June 22nd. It's only in 39 days. Make sure you donate right now if you're a supporter of Andrew Yang to his campaign. We're going to be posting the link in the description. All donations through this link go directly to the Andrew Yang campaign. For all of those folks out there who are not supporters of Andrew Yang, then donate to your favorite candidate too. The Yang Gang is supportive of democracy. So yeah. But we here at the Zach and Matt, we're not Zach and Matt show anymore. We're now the Matt Skidmore show. We support Andrew Yang. So please donate through the link that's in the chat right now. And more importantly, if you support Andrew Yang and you want to help him become the next mayor of New York City, and you also want to help boost New York City's economy, then come on out to the city over the next 39 days and knock on doors. Tell New Yorkers why you think it's a good idea to launch the largest basic income pilot in the history of New York City. Come tell New Yorkers why you think it's a great idea to launch a People's Bank of New York City. And in the process, you'll be boosting the New York City economy by paying your tax dollars. This helps create jobs. It's a win-win situation for everybody. So the message is get your vaccine and get on out to New York City. Let's win this campaign. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure you keep donating through the link in the description below. My name is Matt Skidmore. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time at the next Democratic debate. Make sure you tune on in. Same channel. Everybody, have a great evening.